So today I would like to introduce the results of the survey I made among the Japanese students. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chinatsu TAKEDA, and today I'm going to talk about bread and rice consumption among Japanese students. I would like to start with a question. Can you find at least one denominator among these food and dishes? They are all part of Japanese food culture, even though nobody will introduce them as such. Furthermore, many Japanese people don't know that these dishes exist only in Japan. The reason is foods and dishes like different kinds of bread, pasta, ramen, or omelette rice are not considered authentic Japanese food, like this one. Since I entered Witsumeikan University and started learning about the food culture, I realized that people are really good at arranging and improving foods of foreign origin. As a result of this process, cultural adaptation or Japanization, such food acquire reasonably specific characteristics that become an integral part of Japanese food culture. In my opinion, among these foods, bread is the one that had a most significant influence in Japanese society. Eating bread has become a common practice in our daily lives, and we can buy different kinds of bread anywhere from convenience stores and supermarkets to specialty shops like bakeries. For example, some of my friends eat only bread for their lunch because it is faster and easier than having rice with side dishes. However, since the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a very big impact in our lives, we spent more time at home. It is interesting to see how students' eating habits, especially eating patterns related to bread and rice consumption, have changed as a result of the pandemic. So today I would like to introduce the results of the survey I made among the Japanese students. First, I will pay attention to the process of cultural adaptation of bread in Japan. Second, I'm going to present the results of a survey I conducted among 29 Japanese students about their eating habits, especially the consumption of rice and bread. Finally, I will conclude with my own interpretations of these consumption trends and how they will develop in the future. Let's start with a brief history of bread in Japan. As I mentioned in the beginning, the traditional Japanese diet is centered on rice, and Japan is a country shaped by its relationship with rice. In fact, bread was introduced quite recently, only about 115 years ago. Crucial for the acceptance of bread in the Japanese diet was the invention of ampan in 1875. The texture of bread is very soft and fluffy. In a similarity to manju, it contains sweet red beans paste inside. Manju is a traditional Japanese food, so it can be said that ampan is a fusion of Japanese food and Western food, and it was very easy to be accepted by Japanese people. Since 1875, various kinds of Japanese-style bread were invented. Their main characteristic is the rich context of various ingredients, such as sausage, croquettes, and yakisoba, which is a Japanese dish of stir-fried noodles. This kind of Japanese-style bread is called sozai pan. Sozai means side dish and pan means bread in Japanese. This is a very important point in considering the spread of bread culture in Japan, especially in the middle of the 20th century. This is the period of rapid economic development in Japan, when people's lives became increasingly busier and they had increasingly less time to cook. These high-calorie breads, sozaipan, became quite popular among Japanese people because they allowed them to take energy in a fast and efficient way. This is the reason why bread gradually became an integral part of the Japanese diet as an important staple food second only to rice. Eating sozaipan, that is bread with some other food all in one, is almost the same thing as having a traditional Japanese meal, considering rice with side dish. What is more, my literature review shows that bread is considered a staple food, especially in the case it is enriched with various ingredients like sausage, croquettes, and yakisoba. Next, I would like to introduce the results of my survey, which I conducted in December 2020. 29 respondents replied to my questionnaire about their eating habits, especially those related to bread and rice consumption. These are the questions I asked in my survey. Which do you like better, bread or rice? Which do you prefer to have when you are busy, a rice bowl or a piece of bread? Do you tend to eat more rice during the pandemic than before the COVID-19? The results of the survey are very interesting. I must admit that the answers I got to the first questions, which do you like better, bread or rice, were quite unexpected for me. The graph shows how close the results were. I was surprised because in Japan we tend to think of ourselves as rice people. Hence, I expected that much more students would choose rice, not a bread, as their favorite staple. As for the second questions, which do you choose when you are busy, a rice bowl or a piece of bread? Those who answered rice were 51.7%, while bread was chosen by 48.3% of the respondents. Interestingly, even though more respondents answered they preferred bread to the first questions, in the second one, the number of respondents who said they would choose rice bowls when they were busy exceeded those who would take bread. This comes to show that it is rice rather than bread which is associated with a better sense of fullness. About the third question, do you tend to eat more rice during the pandemic than before the COVID-19? I asked only the respondents who chose bread in the second question. As you can see, although more respondents do not change their eating habits, 42.9% answered they had rice more frequently than before. I think the reason for the increased consumption of rice is that during the pandemic, students spend more time at home. So instead of eating quickly outside as they would do before the COVID-19, they would prepare a meal consisting of rice and a few side dishes. Finally, I would like to think about future patterns of rice consumption in Japan after the pandemic. It's beyond doubt that COVID-19 has had a significant impact on our lives, regional and national economies. When we think of these, we tend to focus on the negative effects. However, I think there are some positive aspects as well. For example, since the outbreak of COVID-19, takeout services have become quite common. On this photo, you can see a takeout bento, lunchbox. With the increasing demand for bento boxes and having more opportunities to cook at home, we tend to eat more rice. I think it is much more satisfying and nutritious to enjoy eating rice with a few side dishes rather than just to have a piece of bread. Even though it takes time and effort to cook at home, we can still buy a bento to enjoy our meals. I think that the current pandemic may turn out to be a chance to reconsider our eating habits and a wiser consciousness to the goodness of our rice-centered traditional diet. Thank you so much for your attention.